Okay, so you've created your animation and you're ready for output. Now, there are a couple things I like to do before final output of a project. First thing is just clean up the entire After Effects project. So let's go ahead and collapse the graphics folder here in the project panel and go up to our workspace and make sure that we're set in the standard workspace. And if your standard workspace looks a little funny, make sure you go ahead and reset it to the standard layout. Now, in order to render this, all we need to do is make sure our training swoosh comp is active by clicking training swoosh in the timeline, and then we can go to composition, add to render queue. Now I'm going to move my render queue up into my composition panel. So let's click the little grippies to the left of the words render queue and just drag up until we get that purple rectangle in the top of my comp panel. So there are a couple different settings we need to go through. The render settings are set to best. If we go ahead and click on the words render settings, you can see this is where I could adjust the overall size of the project. Now, I want to leave it set to full resolution, so it'll render at 1280 by 720. I could also adjust my field settings if I need to, or if I only wanted to render a specific area within the work area, I could specify a custom setting over here. It's automatically going to render the entire duration of everything because my work area is set to the entire length of the composition. So we'll just go ahead and click cancel since the default settings seem to work perfectly well. Now, if I click on the output module settings, in here, I could output a Photoshop file or a TIFF sequence. I want to leave the lossless setting in there, but I'm going to go ahead and click on the word lossless to open up the different module settings. In here, by default, it's going to render a QuickTime file because I'm on a Mac. If you're on Windows, it may very well default to Windows Media. Now, we can leave the default settings because that'll be a lossless codec. Animation is one of the easiest codecs and it's installed on every computer that has QuickTime installed, so I'm going to leave animation set up. I don't want any audio to render, so I'm just going to change my audio settings to audio output off and then click OK. So now we can go to the output 2 settings. Go ahead and just click on the words training swoosh and let's rename the file from training swoosh to bumper and then click save. I just saved it to my desktop. Now, obviously, you can save yours wherever you prefer on your computer. Now, that's going to give me a full resolution file. Now, what if I want to upload something for the web or a different codec or something like that? That's when I would consider using Adobe Media Encoder. And that's a whole different process in and of itself. So I definitely suggest you watch the Adobe Media Encoder section later on towards the end of this title. Let's say I just wanted to create something at about half the size of what I'm working with right now. What I'm going to do is click this little plus button next to the Output 2 option. When I do that, it's going to add yet another output module. So here, let's click on the word lossless. In here, I have an option where I can resize this render. So I'm going to go ahead and click resize, and I'll make sure lock aspect ratio is set up, and I'll go ahead and resize it to a width of only 800. And when I press tab, it'll make it 800 by 450. Now, obviously, you could choose whatever setting you want if you wanted it smaller or what have you. If I wanted to change the codec, I could click on Format Options here and choose a different codec, say H.264 or something like that. I could do that here as well. I'll actually go ahead and just choose H.264 and then click OK. So this is going to be a smaller version at H.264. Now, obviously, if you have Windows Media, you may want to choose one of the Windows Media codecs. So now when I click OK, I'm going to go ahead and render this, but instead of rendering just one version of the file, it's going to render 2. And actually, let's change the name of this as well. I'm going to click on the words training swoosh and say bumper small and click save. Now when we go ahead and render, it's only going to render once, but it's actually going to create 2 separate files at the same time. So it's going to take just a second to go ahead and render. And when it's rendered, I'm just going to jump here to my desktop. So I'll minimize my project. And here, if I double click on the bumper, you can see I have a full resolution QuickTime that's been rendered. So there's my full resolution version. That's awesome. And I can go ahead and close that. But if I double click on the bumper small version, now I've created a smaller version as well. That's also H.264. And that was all created with one render just by using multiple output settings.